Testing. Okay, we're going to start in the next minute or so. If you could please begin to take your seats. Thank you for being here. If you can begin taking your seats, we're going to ask the candidates to go to the appropriate place. Where's Ms. Foster? Are they starting here or they're starting? Okay. Okay. All right. I want to thank you for being here tonight. My name is Mark Washington. I'm city manager, and it is a privilege to have you here and be engaged in this process and give us feedback. Have an opportunity to meet the finalists for one of the most critical positions that I will hire. City manager, and that is the person, the chief law enforcement officer that leads this community and ensures that we are living a quality life in a very safe manner. And it is our police chief. And before we begin tonight, again, I want to thank all of you for being here, but just to remind the community of our journey. As you're aware, the opportunity for us to hire a new chief became available back in December of 2018, where Chief Rahinsky announced his resignation and retirement from law enforcement, and that presented an opportunity for us to begin looking for a new chief. We then hired a very capable search firm, public sector search and consulting, with Mr. Gary Peterson, who is our lead consultant, who's here tonight, to help us with that process. And if you recall, earlier this year, we had several community meetings in which we wanted to know from the public what were the important attributes, the qualities, the characteristics that the community thought were important for its next community, for its police chief. And we had several meetings, one at City Hall, and I think the other was at the Wealthy Theater, where we began profiling the position. Based on that feedback from community, as well as feedback from departmental staff, city staff, myself, and other people, stakeholders in the community, our consultant began and created a profile, a brochure that allowed us to announce our opportunity across the country, across the nation. And based on that, we have a pool of candidates, and we believe tonight the creme de la creme has surfaced. The top 3 candidates from the process, and you'll be introduced to them shortly. Today, our candidates have been in town since Wednesday, last night. And we had an opportunity to meet, they had an opportunity to meet city staff that's within the leadership of City Hall, as well as members of some of our public committees, our Public Safety Committee, as well as the Citizens Appeal Board. They were invited to meet them last night. Today, they met with a series of 6 interview panels. They have been interviewed ad nauseum today. And those panels were representative of people across the community. There were some panels were representatives of the business community. Some were representative from members of the faith community. We had a panel from law enforcement agencies, other cities and counties in this area, as well as a panel of employees. And we had a great panel of employees within the police department. It was representative of command staff, unions, and other staff within the police department. I may be forgetting one other, nonprofit panel, representative of community advocates, activists, interests. So they have gone through a lot today. And they're probably talked out. One of them has hopefully has regained his voice, but they are willing. This is their level of community engagement and commitment, because we also have another opportunity for them to engage the community at large tonight. And so we're going to spend a couple of hours allowing them to introduce themselves to you, and as well as you're maybe having some questions that you would like to ask them. We also are allowing people to engage digitally. We're getting questions, I think, from by email or Facebook Live, as I understand it, and those are coming in, and so we'll have some interaction with that as well. And as there were also pre-submitted questions. So there's lots of engagement, and those of you who came early had a chance to meet them individually, and we'll make them available for some time after the meeting. But a lot of things have occurred, because this is the level of deliberateness that I am taking as manager to make sure we get the right person and I make the right decision. And just to clarify, this is ultimately my decision. It is not a vote of the commission. It is not based on popular public opinion. It is feedback that I am looking for tonight. But at the end of the day, it is a decision that I will make and I will own. So tomorrow, my intent is to get all the feedback from all the various panels, all the ways in which we've engaged people, and to have an opportunity to meet with the candidates, and then take some time thereafter and hopefully make a decision by the end of the month. But I want to thank them for their patience, their cooperation. Having gone through assessment processes like this, I know the level of commitment that it takes to do that and how taxing it is on them, and so I want to applaud them for doing that. So at this time, I would like to do a couple of things. Let me thank the city staff who made this night possible. I want to thank our HR department and their staff. Our HR director is here, Ms. Desiree Foster. I also want to thank our public information staff. Managing Director of Public Information is here as well, Ms. Amy Snow Buckner, and all of the staff, city staff who have made this evening possible tonight. We want to thank the school district for their partnership in making this great venue available for us. So at this time, I would like to turn over to our consultant, Mr. Gary Peterson. Let's give him a big hand as he comes.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Like Mark said, I'm Gary Peterson with Public Sector Search and Consulting out of California. The format tonight is we're going to call each candidate up individually just at the outset and have them introduce themselves and tell them why they want to be the chief in Grand Rapids. And then we'll have, after all three candidates do that, we'll have them seated here to my left, and then we'll have different modes. We'll have two microphones here where citizens can come and ask questions, members from the community. And then, like Mark said, we'll have questions from Facebook Live. And then we have questions that were sent in advance of this meeting as well. So I'll ask those from the podium. Okay, so we're going to start out. Our first candidate is Deputy Chief Eric Payne with the Grand Rapids Police Department. Come on up, take the podium.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone again for being here. I see some familiar faces out there and taking that time. As the city manager mentioned, this is an important decision that he'll have to make. Just something about me, I've been with the department for 33 years in September. I've worked in various parts of the department, and I've taken the promotions to get me to the level of deputy chief. I've been deputy chief now for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. With that role, I made a commitment to Chief Verhinsky to be here for several years. And people have asked me, why am I undertaking to make that next step this late in my career? I could leave. And one person asked me, was I courageous or was I crazy? And I said, well, I don't know yet. Let's see how this turns out. But the reason I feel that I want to take that next step is that I believe we have a good department. I think we do things well. I also believe that we can do things better. Some of the things that I have done throughout my career is building relationships with people in the community. That is what we need to do from not only the chief's position, but from our first hire that comes through the door. We need to instill in them that's what is important. Our number one priority, we're law enforcement, keep the community safe. I had a conversation with a gentleman earlier. this evening who told about an incident where our officers performed very well. Someone had broke into their house. That makes me proud that they are still willing to engage and do their job. We took an oath of office to do our job. We remind officers constantly that's what we're there for. But also, I believe that the direction that we're going is building those relationships within the community. This may get me out of contention for this, but I want to correct the city manager. I didn't come into Grand Rapids. I've been here. This is my home. This is where I work. This is where my children go to school. My drive into work is less than 10 minutes. So I'm within the community. I do business within the community. I am a part of the community. So I want to thank you again for being here. And again, I believe there's more work to be done, even though we have a good department. I think the bottom line it comes down to is building relationships. There are people that I interact with often. We may not agree on things, but we have those conversations, and we need to do that and continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. At this time, I want to remind everyone that we do have comment cards and biographies for each candidate at the desk in the front of the auditorium. So before you go, make sure you fill out a comment card. It'd be really appreciated. The city manager is really interested in your feedback. And with that, I'm going to introduce the next candidate, Assistant Chief Larry Scarrato from the Pittsburgh Police Department, and he's retired. Come on up, Larry. Kind of.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to echo Chief Payne's comments and thank you all for joining us tonight and participating in what is a critical process and a critical decision for Mr. Washington and maybe more importantly, the community of Grand Rapids and the police department that serves it. As it relates to me, I am a 25-year professional in law enforcement. Spent the last 23 years with the City of Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. My last role within the organization was the Assistant Chief of Professional Standards, and I had oversight of policy development, training and education, hiring, retention, internal investigations, and labor management. Why Grand Rapids? Well, Grand Rapids is an opportunity. And it's an opportunity that presented itself maybe unexpectedly to me at the time, but it's an opportunity to take the principles and successful initiatives that we committed to in Pittsburgh and bring them to a city that has a very good police department and to make it great. This organization does many things well, but the community is expecting more engagement, expecting a change of direction in the manner the officers interact. I think Pittsburgh is a unique city in the initiatives that we have been successful in accomplishing. We are one of 6 cities that partnered with the Center for Policing Equity and the National Initiative to Build Community Trust and Justice. And in that, we learned that true community engagement isn't organic, it's effort, and it's intentional. And that to give the police department and the officers, the men and women that work within it, the support that they need, the police administration needs to be intentional in that effort of community engagement, committed to community police partnerships, and not out of a matter of convenience or in moments of crisis, but a matter of intention and necessity. That Sir Robert Peel uses the 9 principles of policing 200 years ago that set the foundation of where we are today. And there's none more true than principle number 7 that speaks to the community are the police and the police are the community. My goal as the leader of this organization, if given the opportunity, is to make Grand Rapids Police Department the national gold standard for law enforcement and community police relations. That for not only this region, but the entire Midwest, that people will look, organizations will look, communities will look to this department and this community and want to imitate and mimic the efforts and advancements that we have made in community police partnership. So with that, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to advance the police department, to make it and move it beyond being great. The men and women of the organization deserve it, and more importantly, the community in which we serve deserves it. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, our third candidate is Mike Yankowski of the Lansing Police Department. Chief, come on up.
Well, thank you. I want to first say that I'm completely humbled and honored to be a part of this selection process. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mike Yankowski. I'm 46 years old. I'm married. I have 2 children. I've been in law enforcement for 25 years, 18 as a supervisor, with the last 6 as the chief of police of the capital city in Lansing. Through my career, I have engaged our community at many different levels, but I learned at a young age as a police officer how I could be the most effective police officer, and that was very quickly learning that our community was so important to our success as an organization. And what I can bring to the table as a chief of police in Lansing is very similar here to the city of Grand Rapids. We're a very diverse urban community. City of Grand Rapids is built very similar in the issues that we face in law enforcement. But through my experiences in the city of Lansing, we've been able to overcome some of those challenges. As the police chief, it's my responsibility to manage and lead a 248-member organization, a detention facility, and manage an annual budget of $46 million. I've always lived a life of service, a service to a community, but always keeping my core values of integrity, compassion, and courage. And as the chief of police, my philosophy really comes down to a community-based, problem-oriented, data-driven approach, with the foundation of everything that we do comes down to police legitimacy and community policing. I firmly believe in policing with the community. The very word community policing says community, and we cannot police our community without the community. When you look at policing in our country over the years, with the use of technology and vehicles, we've kind of gotten away from what policing was all about. And it's about service. It's about helping our community with solutions and problems. It's about getting out of the police car and engaging our citizens, our businesses, our schools, our youth in positive ways. And throughout my career, I've had the opportunities to grow and learn as a leader. And there was no better lesson learned than policing in a city, an urban city, a diverse city that demanded change from its police department, change with dignity and respect. And so everything that we do as an organization, we bring back down to the very principles of serving our community. We get our legitimacy from our community. We get our authority from our community. We get our powers from our community. We need our input from our community. And if we're going to be successful as a community to keep itself safe, we have to work together as one. And so throughout my career, we've had 6 key areas that we've tried to focus on. One is building police and community trust, recruiting and hiring a diverse police department that represents our community, reducing violent crime, increasing training and officer wellness, strengthening our policies and accountability, and the use of technology in our policing philosophies. So why Grand Rapids? 25 years ago, I identified 2 communities in the state of Michigan that I could see my career path that I wanted to be a part of. One was Lansing and the other was Grand Rapids. And though things didn't work out for me 25 years ago, And as I'm approaching my 25th year in Lansing, this opportunity to come to Lansing, or to come to Grand Rapids, is an opportunity that I would not look for any other police chief position in the country. The city of Grand Rapids is a wonderful city, a diverse city, 200,000 residents, second largest in the state of Michigan, and arguably the most desirable place to live and raise a family in the Midwest. Because of my experiences as a police chief over the last 6 years in an urban community, we've been able to restore the public trust internally and externally with the community. We've reduced violent crime, we've increased minority hiring, and also we have brought back the pride of an agency in the community that can be proud of its police department. I look forward to the opportunity, if given, to bring the lessons learned, the best practices, some which are now received national recognition, what we've done in the city of Lansing, to bring that here to the city of Grand Rapids. But I want to point out and reaffirm that my commitment to the city of Grand Rapids is strong, and that when we talk about community policing and community relations, it's about getting our officers involved with the community. There can never be enough community engagement. There can never be enough community policing. We got to give our police officers the tools that they need to be successful. But as the leader of the organization, we also have to support our police officers when they do well. And yes, it is my job to hold them accountable. But as a community, you play a role in both as well. Whether you get involved in Neighborhood Watch, whether you can get involved in one of the commissions, but it's also our responsibility to help our police department and to recognize the good work and to hold us accountable when it's time to hold us accountable and support us when it's time to support us. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to the questions, and so I can expand on some of the good things that we've done and the things that I could bring here to the city of Grand Rapids. And thank you for being involved, because when we talk about community policing, again, you have to get involved with your police department, with your community, or we're not going to keep this community safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. At this time, I'd like to invite all three candidates to come forward and have a seat at the table. On the podium. Good move. Oh, he's got one. I'll take one. You need one? I'm good. Thank you, Desiree. Okay, before I open up the questions to the community, I'm going to ask each candidate a question. I'm going to start with Chief Payne. Chief Payne, given the history of policing within the communities of color, what are the key data points regarding policing that should be made available to the public?
We have a robust, our file management system that we keep our records with. I think it's pretty robust. We need to look at it further to make sure we're capturing all the data that the community is looking for. I think we need to look at, it goes back to our traffic stop study, what was being done out there at the time to give us those wrong numbers, the numbers that are not acceptable for us and for the community. So I think we need to look at the demographics of people that we're encountering and what we're doing, how we're deploying officers, what direction we're giving, and what we're looking to do. Over the last year and a half, that's what I've made a priority of directing officers to focus in on, especially with like the tickets and stops. I want them out there stopping people with hazards and not just stopping to stop people. I think there's too much, that's where the issue with the traffic stop study came in, that we were just out there in certain areas and we were just stopping and detaining people for no reasons just other than the number, and I must say, they're legal stops, but that's not what we should be focusing on. And utilizing that data that we have, which I don't think we've done a good job at doing, will help us direct our officers in what we're looking for.
Thank you. And that question was one of the advanced questions that was sent in online. Next question is for Chief Scorado. Chief Scorado, how should the community members participate in establishing the priorities of the police department?
Well, check. Is it working? Can you hear me out there, more importantly? So the community is responsible for giving the police organization its charge. Community groups, community leaders, they should be the entity that is giving us direction on what is a priority to them, to you all. In any police community partnership that's viable and interactive, it's not the goal of, or the position of the chief of police to dictate to you what should be of value to each of your communities. It's imperative, if I believe in community police as a partnership, that I'm taking direction from you on what is of value to you. And those priorities for the organization come from the community. And that is what real community police partnerships look like, is that we are accomplishing and the will of the communities and the will of the members of the community in a responsible and receptive way.
Thank you. Chief Yankowski, if hired as the next police chief, how do you envision interacting with the police union?
So my experience as a police chief for 6+ years is about establishing relationships, and relationships go internally and externally. So our relationships with the union, it has to come down to a compromise from time to time. Is that in order to move the organization forward, there's things that the union's going to have to compromise on, and there's things that the management is going to have to compromise on. But through my career, we have always had a good working relationship in knowing and understanding that no matter what decisions are made, they're made for the best components of the organization and our community. What is best for our community? And sometimes it's an operational thing, and sometimes you got to leverage the economics to get the operational things. But when you're having conversations and you're in negotiations with union, know and understanding that they are a vital part of our success and our commitment to our community, is that when you really break down a contract negotiations, it's about establishing rules and regulations. It's about setting protocols and policies in order for the organization to move forward, not for an individual to move forward. So anytime that we have negotiations, or we're talking about arbitrations, we're talking about discipline matters, it's what's best for the organization and the community and not for an individual.
Thanks, Chief. At this time, I'd like to invite members of the community. We have 2 mics up front. Somebody wants to come forward? Sir, come forward. Sir, you want to go first, and then you're up next. If you would, state your name.
My name is Pablo Bello. I'm obviously a member of the community.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, I have a question for Jankowski. Why you didn't fire Vandenberg for calling immigration against a citizen of the Grand Rapids, former Marine, and why you didn't fire him?
Oh, you know what? He doesn't work at Grand Rapids, so he wasn't involved in that.
Well, we have an incident about the police officer, the chief of police involved in this incident. One of the officers called immigration against a citizen, a former Marine, But this is for the three of you. I'm sorry.
So,
Yeah,
you know what,
you
sir?
look so-
I can help you out, okay?
And then, so what are you going to do when a situation like that happens, when one of your officers call an immigration against a citizen of the United States, a former Marine,
Great.
somebody who has having mental problems. And also, this is a problem that we have with the police, the Latino community. We are terrified of the police because the police works with ICE, and they call immigration of members of the Latino community just because racial profiling, like me, I'm Mexican, I look Mexican, so this guy must be illegal,
Right.
You had to take if he commits some misdemeanor,
I totally
he
understand.
has to go. So what are you going to do with this? You're a member of the police, no?
Yes, sir.
You
Yes, I am.
yeah.
So you want to address?
So answer this question and
So one thing, we're not going to
and-
address any current personnel issues within the city.
well,
but what we
this
can't,
is problems that we are confronting
Sure.
the Latino community.
of course, let me ask
And this is the problem they are confronted
Sir.
when they get the job.
of course, let me ask it a different way.
And the second issue is that Latinos, most of the Latinos, because the status, they don't have driver's license. So I'm asking you for tolerance, again, for Latinos who doesn't have a driver's license.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so let me coalesce that question a different way, if I could.
No different way. I'm asking the question.
Okay. All right. You want to go? Go ahead, sir.
All right, my name is Woody.
Wasn't a question.
Are they going to answer the question?
He didn't ask a question.
Ongoing personnel issue?
Yeah.
As much,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
and I'll get to that, but
What is the answer?
to his specific question,
Eric. Answer the ICE question. How would you interact with ICE?
absolutely. I can't go into the first part. What I can say is what we have developed, and it's in the works, it's in draft form, something we did not have, so I can't go into the details of it, but a policy on contacting our federal our partners. It's the foreign national policy that we're working on. We've had input from many different groups in the city, and we're in the process of developing it, and it will further guide us and when we contact our federal partners, not just ICE, but all partners.
Great. And Mike, you want to, Chief Yankowski, you want to jump in?
Yep, I can answer that from my perspective as well. So in the city of Lansing, we're a welcoming city, and we had put together an executive order at the city level, but also at the police department level. And so anytime that we have an interaction with an individual, let me back up and say that, we have policies and procedures in place that say we're not going to stop someone based upon their race, gender, ethnicity. And so our policies go even further, is that if we have any contact with an individual, it is not our practice or our protocol to ask the immigration status of an individual. If for some reason they are arrested on an outstanding warrant or a new charge, they're going to be booked and only held on that new charge. We do not recognize a civil detainer. We will only recognize a judicial warrant signed by a judge. We also have rules and policies in place that say if for some reason Homeland Security needs to be contacted, the officer is to contact their supervisor then contacts the duty captain, and then ultimately the chief of police gets called. And I can tell you during my tenure as police chief, we have never called immigration for an issue to let them know a status of an individual that we might have in custody. So moving forward, anytime that we have any interaction with someone that might have an immigration status, we do not ask them the status of that. We do not get involved with ICE agents unless there is a judicial warrant or there's a criminal matter that is outside of any civil type of disdainer. Now, what we also do is we recognize the consular ID form of identification as well. And we put into place policies, procedures, training bulletins, one-on-one training with our officers to deal with these type of issues that come up. And I will also tell you, I'm a member of an all-pack that we started in Lansing almost 3 years ago. My co-chair is immigration attorney, so I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with her in putting, best practices, lessons learned moving forward. So for me, my policy, my view on immigration, again, is that we don't contact Department of Homeland Security or immigration based upon the immigration status alone.
Thanks, Chief. Chief Scarrato, you want to respond?
So simply enough, I co-authored our unbiased policing policy that if you go online and look at the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police policy and procedures, you'll see directly in the middle of the policy speaks to immigration status. More importantly, that the Bureau of Police will not enforce administrative warrants issued by ICE, that we will only enforce judicial warrants. That directive moves to Warden 4 within the organization to state simply that immigration status is not to be a factor in any interaction, nor is it to be an outcome or a notification process following an interaction. And so without belaboring it any further, it's very similar to Lansing's policy and the policy that Chief Payne is speaking about in progress.
Thank you. Sir.
All right, my name is Woody, and I've been here a long time. Let me tell you a little bit about Grand Rapids, which y'all don't know. Within the last 10 years, people of color have just gotten into the jury pool. So that lets you know how diverse we are. Now, we live in a city to where the chief or whoever make the policies for the people have two separate policies, one for you, one for them, and one for us. Now, if you're elected as a chief or get the job, what are you going to do to make the policy so all people have one policy? This is for all three of you.
You want to take it first, Chief Scarrato?
So I'll start by saying, as a person of color, I'm acutely aware of how my decisions affect the communities in which we serve. That the policies and procedures that are provided and given to the men and women of the GRPD have to be fair and equitable through all of our communities. And it must be considered on how they impact communities that have been disenfranchised through history. There's historical relevance to everything that we do and every decision that I make. And I need to be acutely aware of how those decisions affect communities of color, communities of other, the mental health community, the LGBTQ community, the black and brown community, the homeless population. Every decision I have has impact. And so what I commit to the citizens and communities of Grand Rapids is to be aware, to have understanding and empathy toward those concerns, and to do and make decisions that are in the best interest of the community.
Thank you. Chief Payne?
Yeah, and I echo what Chief just said there, but I will further state what is being done in Grand Rapids. Obviously, as a person of color, I share your pain with the history of law enforcement, where law enforcement has dealt with minorities and people who have been marginalized in the system. I have been racially profiled. I understand it. I feel that pain. What we need to do is also get our officers better equipped to understand the different cultural entities they may run into. It's not just the black and brown, it's the Asian. We have a huge Bosnian community here in Grand Rapids. It runs the gamut of people that we deal with. What we have done recently is every recruit that walks through the door, we send them up to the Jim Crow Museum in Paris. There are some kids who are not even aware of what Jim Crow is all about. We need to expose them to what that was all about and how it impacted the community when it pertains to law enforcement. There's more training that needs to be done to educate our new recruits. There's older group out here, most of you know, they don't even remember what Rodney King was about and what occurred with him. So I think in exposing our new recruits to understand that that is a big concern of the community and that there's different cultures that they'll be running into and how to deal with that better. And as the chief mentioned, the LGBTQT, yeah, I'm sorry, I messed that up, but that community, we need to make better strides in interacting with them. So it runs a gamut of people who have been marginalized and where law enforcement has interacted with them in a negative way. I recognize that, I acknowledge it. There are things I mentioned in one of the panel interviews today, way we went about, and I mentioned it earlier, enforcing the law and how we directed officers. It was nothing illegal about it, but it had unintended consequences to the community and how we did things. We need to be more focused and aware of what the community, not just what we perceive, we need to listen to the community on how we're doing enforcement and things and be more directed with it. Thank you for, that's a good question, thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Mike? Yep, and I will add, and some of this is echoed up here already, but you know, it's about education of our officers. And I will tell you, I'll add something different to the conversation, is that it starts right at the recruiting and hiring phases. Is that, you know, when we are recruiting the next generation of police officers, we want good human beings. We want good, diverse communities. We want officers that have good moral, you know, compasses, that they have integrity. And so all the questions that we ask during our interview panel, which in mind, we have citizens at the table that help us pick our next police officers, is that we want to make sure that we're representing our community in all walks of life, with life experiences. And so we've also taken it and we've also recognized that law enforcement, you know, has been used over the years and not the way that it was intended, going back to slave patrols, you know, segregation, immigration after 9/11, the Muslim community. And so we do a similar thing, and we send all of our police officers to cultural competency training at Ferris State University at the Jim Crow Museum. We send them down to Dearborn. We send them to the Holocaust Museum. And we're also working on a 4-hour training block on the history of policing. And then our policies and procedures, our civilian oversight that we have, all those come into play. For the last 18 years, we have been conducting traffic data analysis studies. So every single one of our traffic stops is recorded, not only on paper, but on video and on body-worn camera as well. And so then we can utilize that data. If a complaint comes in, we have a video. We have the ability to go back and look individually at that officer's data as well. But then we take our data every single year. We've been doing it for 18 years. I challenge to find another agency, you know, over that time period that has taken this serious to that nature. And we have the Michigan State University review our data and give us feedback. And I'm pleased to announce that, you know, those studies have come back to find that, you know, there's no signs of systemic problems of racial profiling in our agency. But that doesn't mean that the work doesn't stop there. We're constantly working on trying to educate our officers. And yes, there have been times that the data didn't come back good on a police officer, and it was our job to hold that officer accountable, and that officer no longer works for us. And I would also say that it's about establishing a tolerance in the department that you are not going to tolerate for any type of biased policing, period. So if you hear an officer say something that's inappropriate, or if you see an officer making traffic stops or stopping people just because of the color of their skin, then we want our police officers to report that so it can be investigated and handled appropriately. But it's an ongoing process. There's always room for improvement, but we recognize, you know, the past history of how policing was done in our country, and it's not all favorable.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question. I was going to ask the Deputy Chief there. My question is, and I'm going to cut it shorter, what makes a great cop and what makes the worst cop. But I want to ask a question that's dear to me. There's a movement going around the world that's called cop watching, auditors, being from California, I'm sure you've seen it, about how people that are doing a job within the confines of the law, where they're being attacked, brutalized, guns pulled out by police officers. And most of them are senior officers. Shouldn't they already know what the law is and maybe not engaged like that? You know, sure, you can ask, hey, you got to leave or whatever. But if they're not breaking the law, why threaten? Why ridicule people like that? But I want to know what you think personally about what makes a great cop and what makes a worse cop.
Thank you.
That's for all of you guys.
Let's start with Chief Yankowski at the end of the table.
Yeah, first and foremost, we want highly ethical police officers. We want officers that are full of integrity, that have the compassion, the empathy, the understanding that they can't walk in the shoes of our community, and that they have a greater understanding of what the call to be a police officer is about. And so when we look for police officers, we also look for people that are good communicators, they're good listeners, that they're sincere, that they're genuine, that they have a better understanding of what the cause of our profession is about. It's about helping people. It's about serving people. But everything that we do prior to hiring someone, we are looking for the best possible human being that we can. And those traits are some of the most vital components that we can have. Again, compassion, empathy, communication, listening skills. That's what makes a good police officer. And honestly, you know, we're going to make mistakes. And their ability to say, you know what, I could have handled that better. I will do a better job next time.
So wouldn't you think the worst cop possible would be the cop, I'm just going to say it for example, that shoots somebody? Is that the worst cop possible that you would think?
Well, listen, I think the ability for, when we come across the worst cop possible, it's those that aren't holding the core values of what it means to be a police officer, that they don't have the integrity, that there's two kinds of police officers at times. There's times that police officers become a police officer because they want to help people. They're there for that noble profession reason. And then sometimes there are police officers that join it just because they have some power, some authority, they have the ability to make decisions. That's not ethical and constitutional policing. That's not what we want. We want good, solid, moral character, fully integrity people.
Thank you. Chief Payne?
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned, I think it really starts at the hiring process on the officers that we bring in. I know here at Grand Rapids, we have community members that sit on the panel that vet these officers when they're applying to the department. It's vetted through the Community Relations Committee or Commission or Diversity Inclusion. So as the chief mentioned, we're looking for the best candidate out there. And I would echo, I was a commander of the crisis negotiation team. It's not always about how much I can talk to people. Are you listening? Are you listening to what people are saying? An officer who is able to listen and really get to the core value of the problems that may exist or what they're being confronted with, I think that makes a good officer. There's a number of things, traits that we look for in good officers, but being able to relate to people, have that interpersonal skill, being able to communicate. That's what I'm looking for in every officer that we have. And actually listening and understanding, not just one ear and out the other. You have to be able to comprehend what the problems are. That's what we're looking for in the officers at Grand Rapids.
And Chief, what makes a bad officer?
Bad officer, as was mentioned, one that's not ethical, the one that's not out there serving the public in a positive way. And
would that also include the officer that's doing the crap? Would that include his partner who sits and just watches it?
absolutely, we have to hold each other accountable. And as much as the public hold us accountable, I'm really proud with the Grand Rapids Police Department when 21st century policy and police procedure review team came in and looked at our data from our internal affairs. They found that we had a high rate of internal complaints made. That means within the police department, these were not generated by citizens. This is where someone in the police department saw an officer doing something not correct, and we held them accountable, along with, or they were investigated. Along with that, our sustain rate was very high based on the national average. So I think there's more work that could be done in our internal affairs department. Issue that's come up recently was with the Citizens Appeal Board. I'd like to see that become, I really believe that's going to change from what the format they're in right now. What that looks like, we'll have to develop it together as a department, as a community, as a city, to make that whole process of holding officers accountable.
Great.
But we also need to praise them when they're doing good work also. Yep, I understand. Absolutely, and
Thank you.
we're all on the same page there.
Thank you. Chief Scarrato, good cop, worst cop.
Good cop, worst cop. I look for men and women that are committed to the service of others. And that commitment needs to take place prior to them applying to become a police officer. That's participation in volunteer organizations. That's being a member of the Boys and Girl Scouts, the Boys and Girls Clubs, that they have to have shown and exhibited the commitment of service to others prior to their interview or prior to their application. That the men and women that are privileged to serve the community treat every person, and when I say every, I mean, let me stress the word EVERY, person, with dignity and respect, no matter what the means and nature of that encounter is. That they have just the common courtesy of human decency. So what is the, and that's simple, and that's what I look for. What makes a bad or a poor cop is one that seeks to abuse their power and privilege, that when they abuse the oath of office, that to service of others, to uphold the law, that power becomes more important than their level of service to the community. That's a poor cop. Well, there are always processes as it relates to progressive discipline. The officers are afforded due process just like any other person would be, and I think it's important if you want to be fair and accountable that as an administrator you're also fair and accountable to the processes and the due process of the officer's rights as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Very good. Sir?
Yes.
State your name and question.
Reggie Smith, and I'm the Neighborhood Association Board President here in Roosevelt Park. And so 2 quick questions, and it's about your biography. Share a story from your professional life in which you had to admit that you're wrong, and then also share a story when you had to admit that you did not know.
Let's start at this end of the table, and we'll start with Chief Scarrato. So it's did something wrong, didn't know, right?
I don't know a lot of things, and to share a story, I guess that kind of puts me to be more introspective of moments in my life. That's a difficult question. I think I'd have to ponder on that, because it's just the ability to admit you don't know, or the ability to admit when you're wrong. And if you've ever been in a long-term relationship, that's probably every day that I come home, is that it's something I didn't know or something that I did wrong. As it relates to the profession, I think I can only say that I've made mistakes in decisions. I've made mistakes as an officer. I've made mistakes as an administrator, and that I'm willing and capable of learning from them. I don't know all of the answers to all of the questions, but I am committed to ensuring I build a team that can answer all of the questions to all of the answers, or have all the answers to all the questions, and more importantly, that you recognize that there are going to be times that we're going to be wrong, as long as we're wrong for just reasons, I think is rather important.
Thank you. Chief Payne?
Yeah, absolutely. We're human beings. That's what sometimes people forget. In law enforcement officers, we make mistakes. I know the media, I'm assuming they did it to you, but I know they FOIA'd my personnel file. I had the ability to take things out that were old, and I never did that. I own what's in there, and there were some mistakes in there that I made throughout my career. There was things that I did correctly that was found out that I did them correctly. I can give you a specific, but I don't think that's what you're looking for. I'm saying there are things in my personnel file that I own that I did incorrectly. If I did something wrong, I would let someone know that. One in particular, I missed a knife on a person that I took in a turnkey. That's pretty significant. I should have searched that person better. I didn't ask for any type of hearing on it. I said, I did it. I'm wrong. So that came to mind when you said something you did wrong. It's in my personnel file. I was corrected on it, and I made sure I searched people very well after that. Not knowing, as the chief said, there's a lot of things I don't know. I have been with the department many years. I have a lot of historical knowledge. The day I walk out, I hope I learned something new on something that I did not know. Again, we're human beings. I hope that as a person, I continue to grow and learn new things. I can tell you this process that Mr. Washington pointed out today has been something I didn't know how extensive it was. It's been quite the process of vetting us out. So there's many things that I can't point to one thing in particular with that I don't know, other than there are things I don't know.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Yankowski?
So I'll say that I've learned more through my mistakes than my successes, and that has really been helpful through the years. When I was a young police officer, I thought I knew what how the police should be, policing the community that I worked in, the neighborhood that I worked in. And, I remember having a conversation with a gentleman that I had some interactions with, and he kind of set me in my place. And he told me, he goes, you have no idea anything about me. You don't know where I came from. You don't know how I live every single day. You don't know how I was raised as a child. You don't know if I was abused as a child. And so that really set me straight, is that I thought I knew my role as a police officer, but it really changed the way that I policed as a police officer, as a young officer. And I've tried to embrace that throughout my career as I continued up as a leader and as I worked through issues of our organization, our agency, and pass that on to other police officers. We say this all the time, is that we cannot walk in the shoes of our community, and our community cannot walk in the shoes of our police officers. And just when I think I've figured some things out, I'll run across a crime victim, and I'll realize that I got some more learning to do. When it comes down to it, what it's taught me is to treat everyone like my family would want to be treated. And we really permeate that through the organization, that what you're going to be remembered for is not your accomplishments as a police officer, it's how you treated people. And that's one of the mistakes that I made as a young police officer, because I thought I knew how to police my neighborhood when I was a beat officer at a young age, and that stuck with me throughout the rest of my career.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for the question. Good evening.
Hi. My name is Sandy Van Der Zijde, and I live on the southeast side of Grand Rapids. I want to thank you, first of all, for making yourselves available to the community for questions. My question is for Chief Larry. You. Yes. I want to know why you retired from the Pittsburgh Police Department, and why, since I recently retired, I want to know why you want to come out of retirement to take a challenging job such as the Grand Rapids
Good
Police
question.
Officer,
So,
Police Chief.
yeah, so the retirement side of it first is that I was, at the time, retirement eligible. I had completed my bachelor's degree and I started to pursue my master's degree. And I felt that there was an opportunity in my life. So some of the research, then I was officiating basketball, right? And it provided me with the financial stability and resource to step away from the profession to pursue education. So I'm pursuing my master's degree in organizational development and leadership. And what I felt at the time was I had only been educated and trained by the police. And all of my principles and theories came from other police officers. But to be a better leader, that I needed to seek education outside of the confines of the organization, that I needed to engage academia and engage business leaders and other community members, the private sector, and how they were managing and leading their organizations. And so I never intended to step away from policing for a long period of time. I intended to step away until I had completed my degree and that commitment to another level of understanding and growth. So it will be complete in March of 2020. And so I think with that, this opportunity presented itself maybe even a little earlier than I expected, but it was such a unique opportunity for me that I felt it was worth moving forward through the process, and I will continue to focus and seek that growth as it relates to my education and then my experiences from my master's degree program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening.
Good evening. I want to say thank you also for this opportunity and this forum that we get a chance to come and ask questions and hear you answer questions. My name is Marilyn Booker, and I work with the Dispute Resolution Center of West Michigan. I'm the program manager for Restorative Practices Justice, and so my questions are in that area. I've heard some citizens before me talk about some issues when the community is harmed, and so I had my questions. I submitted them earlier, but with the way things are going, I thought I better come up here and ask them. So, of course, when I need it, it just disappeared on me. Sorry. All right, so I had two questions, and be as brief as possible. I know, and if you, like you had said earlier, if you don't know, you don't know, but I do have these questions and I wonder about. The first one I have is, and I'd like each of you to kind of briefly answer the question. First one is, name one thing you would plan to implement to ensure that the voice of the citizens of Grand Rapids are heard and responded to publicly related to public misconduct or mistakes of police actions in a way that repairs the harm and instills faith and rebuilds trust in the policing of our community.
Okay, we started last time with Chief Scaratos. Let's start in the middle with Chief Payne.
Simply putting it out there, we have moved more toward transparency within the department and to acknowledge when we do something incorrect. So I think we're moving in that right direction. There were a time when I think we held on to things too much. But putting it out there immediately, as much as we can, as the chief mentioned, and as it was kind of tied in, there is a process that we must follow whenever we're trying to correct wrongs that we've done. So we have to follow those processes, but as soon as we can get that information out there, be as transparent about it. If we've done something wrong, acknowledge it.
Thank you. Chief Yankowski.
There's the old saying, if you mess up, you need to fess up. And, I think that, opportunities to share things with our public, I've never shied away from having community dialogue. And it doesn't always have to be in a formal setting. People pick up the phone all the time. They say, "Hey, Chief, I want to talk to you about an incident." And I go to their house and we sit down and we have conversations. Sometimes we have multiple conversations. We engage in a lot of opportunities for our citizens to get involved with the police department. But, having that dialogue and bringing in programs like Truth, Racial Healing, Transformation that we're a part of, that shows that we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So we're open to as much dialogue as possible, knowing and understanding that employees do have rights as well.
So I am a proponent of civilian review and civilian participation in administrative processes, whether it be training and education, any policing initiative, policy development, and the organizational tempo, and how important that if we insist that our motives are pure, how important transparency is with the community, and how important, more than the transparency, is the meaningful engagement and participation in the development of those policies and initiatives.
So part two, just because I submitted 2 questions. Thank you for being brief and answering. I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. The second question I have is more in a proactive stance of what is your plan, if you have one, if you thought about it, to implement or to execute a proactive approach to creating positive relationships between the citizens of Grand Rapids, not based on doing things to them or for them, or, I've heard some things that make me wonder about that, but measurable actions with proven practices of working with people that demonstrate value, and I've heard you say the value of a human being, that demonstrates value for everyone in our city.
So I'll start. I can't stress enough the number of times that we have the ability to get out and have community engagement. We do over 500 community engagements in the city of Lansing as a police department. The more that we can get our police officers out and about, away from the calls for service, if you will, to be proactive. We have many summer programs that we're involved with. We have over 30 summer programs that we actively get our police officers involved with. We've restarted our police athletic program. We have a great program where we're going into the schools and educating our officers are going into the schools and educating our kids between 4th and 6th grade about making good choices, conflict resolution. The proactive side of it, we have just an enormous amount of community engagement that we push out every single day, and especially during the summertime. We can't do enough of it, but that would be one of the first things that I would do. Get our police officers out of the cars and get them talking to our citizens.
Great, thank you. I think Chief Scarato.
So one of my goals for the organization within the first 6 months that given the opportunity to lead this department is to create public safety councils, and not in the manner in which it's created today with the elected leadership, but that we create public safety councils within the 3 wards that represent all 32 neighborhoods within the city of Grand Rapids. And with that, you're talking about meaningful policing initiatives that are created by and for you to us, the GRPD, and not in the vice versa mode. So that is the very first step, is formalizing a process that ensures that the community's voice is heard, and more importantly, not heard, but it's listened to, and then there's action taken upon those voices. So that is my #1 priority as it relates to community police relations.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Payne?
It was kind of touched upon, but getting these officers out of the cars, I built those relationships, and I know it can be done. And it crosses all segments of the community. Officers need to better interact with people. The challenge is, as the chief mentioned, getting them not saddled down with those calls for service. We just had a study done on the department. We're going to have to take a hard look at how we provide service for the community. There are things that was recommended that we no longer respond to, which would clear up some of our officers' time. That's going to be a tough call, because I think the community expects and our department expects that we're responding to everything. And that's going to be a difficult decision, but I think we're really going to have to take stock in that study and look at the things that we're dealing with. And similar to what the chief mentioned there, I like to bring back, and I'll use the old term, but the Chiefs Advisory Board. I would probably use something different. I want the citizens engaged in the everyday workings of the police department. I cannot have all 200,000 members of the community having their input, but some type of representation from the different areas of town where they're embedded in our training, our policy and review, and different things like that. It'll be very robust. I want them doing ride-alongs so that they see what officers are dealing with and how we're directing them to interact with the community. So with all those things, those are some of the things I would love to see come back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I want to remind everyone that we have interpretation services for both listening and asking a question. So please let someone from the staff know if you need those services. And we're going to go over here.
I'm Martha Cooper. I'm a longtime resident of Grand Rapids. I've been involved in activism in our community, specifically, well, with housing. We've got a lot of issues here, and but I've got a couple things I specifically wanted to address. As you may know, and I hope you do, and have you done your homework on us too, that we've had the Michigan Civil Rights Commission here and listening to the residents about their concerns with the behavior of the police department. Now, I want you to know that I appreciate the job that they do. But I'm feeling a lot like there's a little bit more, there's a lot more racial tension. We've always had it here, and my concerns have been the mistreatment of youth. We've had certain areas that we designate as high crime, and so teenagers walking in the street, which is the most normal thing in America, are suddenly, in the end, it's escalated to the point where we've got a gun held on a teenager who is getting grabbed for walking in the street. So I think that's over the top. There's little kids, because they've been made to walk backwards at gunpoint, and I know that those little kids know enough about our culture to know that they could be killed, or at least have the idea that they could. I think that's trauma, and it's unnecessary. So I am asking for big changes, okay? I'm not asking to whitewash everything because we're all supposed to be nice. We got a little bit of West Michigan nice, and that's a great thing. However, what's coming out of Washington is not nice. And it's pretty much being led by one person. This isn't gone through where we have this immigration trouble. We'll just call it the trouble. Because that trouble is not necessarily from the people that live here and are in this community and build our city and work here and support each other. Okay, those are not the people that are the problem. But that narrative coming out of Washington has come right down to our police department. Regardless of what he was trying to ask you, which was, how do you feel about an immigrant being profiled? Because that is exactly what it was. He was a police liaison to ICE. Right. So I know it's getting long. What I'm going to pull it up to is this. Coming into this, there's a movement here called Cosecha. We have a lot of allies like me who will help stand with these people so that they will not be afraid, as they do not deserve to be. When I went on the march for Cosecha, I was in an assistant role as an ally. I was just giving water and snacks. And they went to the city department before that march, and they explained what they were about was a nonviolent movement. And every year we've had this march, and it hasn't been anything but little kids and strollers, not a violent crowd. This last May, there were 29 state police on bikes 3 feet apart. Across the street, there were Grand Rapids police, crowds of bikes, okay? And then we get up to Wyoming, and there's so many police in the intersection, it was more the police disrupting the traffic because all those immigrants were on the sidewalk. The only time the police said anything was if you put your foot down accidentally and told you to get back up on the sidewalk. I did not believe, that we have the 4 horsemen up in Wyoming. And police outside of Rogers Park, they weren't going to do anything. It was a nonviolent. If you had shown up and walked for 3 hours, you could see that that police response was over the top, unnecessary, and could have been withdrawn. It was amazing the amount of money and time. And they say you don't have time for community policing, but that was community intimidation. It's not just the immigrant community that build our community into something special. I want to know if we're going to get a police chief that would let that happen. Intimidation in America because of who you are.
Thank you.
Or because of what you look like. And that's my question, and I'll go sit down. But I'm really wanting to know, was that a police chief decision? I know there was disruption at the city hall. And that, by the way, was the allies like me, not the immigrants. They are nonviolent. I'd like the answer to that question.
So, as stated, let's start on this end this time with Chief Scarrato.
So in my role as the chief of police, I support First Amendment rights and then protecting the citizens while they execute those First Amendment rights. I am a willing participant to be a part of any just movement. So not standing and giving directive to my officers in how they manage crowds and how they direct the organization, but being a participant in, walking with the individuals in our community that are just and right. So there's when you see your chief of police as a participant of a peaceful march, it changes the narrative for the entire organization. I am a believer of leading the men and women of this organization. And for them to follow, I must set an example. And setting that example, that means being out and in front and a part of. So I hope that answers your question. And thank you for your sincerity.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Payne.
Yeah, that's what I was going to lead into. The department has historically encouraged people to express their First Amendment rights. What we do want to happen, though, is that it's done in a safe and orderly way. We go to extremes to try and get people to work with us. So, and I 100% agree with you. That was a huge drain on resources that day. I think it could have not occurred had we had better information and interaction. So we're not having that relationship with the particular group that was involved in that march, and we needed better information. There's also requirements for permits. I think we worked with them very well to try and get that accomplished. So if we had that information, there would have been a lot less police officers out there that day.
Thanks, Chief. Chief Yankowski.
So as the police chief in the city of Lansing, the capital of the state of Michigan, we deal with quite a few protests. And I will tell you, we live in a democratic society. And it's our job to provide constitutional policing. And we have a right to protect everyone's First Amendment speech. So I will tell you, we have allowed a lot of things to happen in the city of Lansing for people to express their First Amendment right. When it becomes violent or people are destroying property is when we really insert police resources. So I will tell you that, my philosophy on protest is that we're pretty hands-off. We allow people to voice their First Amendment right. We will shut down intersections if people overtake a street. If they overtake an intersection, there's been times that we've let them sit there for hours within reason. Depending on the set of circumstances, we recognize that we police in a democratic society and that constitutional policing is in order. So we break it down based upon if there is no violence, there's no destruction of property, we're pretty hands-off when it comes to these. But I will say this, one of the things that law enforcement has been challenged with is that there are other people that might not have the same views as you, and then they go and use their vehicles as a weapon and put you in harm's way. So sometimes, that's where the police resources get brought in, is to protect the rights of everyone that are expressing their First Amendment rights.
Thanks, Chief. So we're going to hold off for a second. We're going to do a question that's coming from Facebook Live. This is for all three candidates, and we'll start with Chief Payne. Chief Payne, how do we recruit a more racially diverse department and encourage police officers to live in the community?
Recruiting is a challenge for every department across the nation, and we should have a department that reflects the demographics of that community. With that said, we need to hire the most qualified person. If we lower our standards to meet those goals, that creates headlines. So we have to maintain our standards. We have to have a more robust efforts in going out, getting recruits that are looking to, that will reflect the community. Recently, we've just brought back sponsorship to the academies. These are people who are not licensed to be police officers in the state of Michigan. We did that before. Quite frankly, the budget would not allow it for many years. We recognize that will give us the ability to have a more diverse candidate pool, thus getting the best people in. So right now we have 11 recruits out of Grand Valley, and it's a diverse group of people, and that's what we look to do more and more.
Great.
There was a second.
Second part is, how do you encourage your police officers to live in the community?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up often. Legally, I cannot force them to live in the city. I know the city itself has made incentives for them to move into the city. I just moved about a year and a half ago, and I'm open to moving again where I'm living in the city. I will say, though, I mentioned I'm very close to living in the city. I'm about 1.25 miles right outside the city. If the opportunity comes up and I find a location within the city, I'm open to moving into the city.
Great. Thanks, Chief. Chief Yankowski.
So recruiting and hiring is one of my top priorities. We've actually been recognized at the national level for our recruiting and hiring protocols and policies. I will tell you that it is a national crisis in law enforcement to even recruit a police officer to do the job in today's day and age, but even more difficult to get minorities. But I will tell you that if you work hard at it, you can accomplish that, and we're a product of that. Out of the last 3 or 4 classes that we've hired, our minority female hiring has been at 70% and higher. And so we have really broken it down. I could talk probably half an hour on this issue alone, but really we've tried to grow our own talent. And when we got our police officers back in the schools, we try and engage our youth at a young age. We have an Explorer program, kids at the age of 14 to 21 that can be actively involved with our police department. And then we send them onto the police academy as a cadet as well. And not only with that, when we talk about recruiting and hiring, it's one of my biggest priorities. I engage our young adults, our youth, and encourage them to be police officers. You'll find me texting them, calling them, creating personal relationships. But I also will tell you, it comes down to your reputation, not only internally, but externally. Do they feel welcomed in a community? Do they feel supported in a community? I went right back to our community and said, hey, listen, we are struggling to hire police officers, let alone police officers from our community or minorities from our community. We need your help. If you continue to bash the profession and say that you're a lousy police department, who is going to want to work for you? So it is a community involvement, and everyone in the organization plays a role on that. But recruiting and hiring is a challenge in law enforcement, but it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, and there's extra resources that have to be put forward. Sponsoring individuals that might not have the financial means to become a police officer is one of the most effective ways that you can do that. And so we're about a 50-50 split. We sponsor half of our individuals to the police academy. But again, they have to feel welcomed within the organization and in the community. That's the number one thing that came out of a recent survey that the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, they did a survey and they asked individuals, Why do you choose a particular police department over another? And it wasn't about pay, it wasn't about benefits, it was about they felt welcomed in the organization and the community that they were serving.
Thanks, Chief. Chief Scarrato, how do we recruit a more racially diverse department, encourage officers to live in the community?
So maybe I'll answer it backward just to keep it just a little different. As the chief executive, I think it's an obligation of mine to live within the city of Grand Rapids. I think that sets an example for the men and women that we're hiring, that we take ownership of the city in which we reside, in the community in which we live. I recognize that it's not mandated and it can't be enforced by law, but it can be strongly encouraged. And I strongly encourage to do as you see, and that's me living in the community that I police, and I think there's value to that. That daily engagement, seeing, more importantly, now you start talking about recruiting, you see your police officer at the store, you see your police officer in church, you see your police officer on a daily basis, and it builds toward the narrative of relationship building. With recruiting, it's purposeful and intentional. If you don't give any credence to or the numbers of diversity or lack thereof within your organization, you won't recruit in the same vein. You have to develop a regional recruiting plan that is representative of today's recruit. Oftentimes you hear we don't want to lower our standards, but the standards don't represent today's applicant. Those standards were oftentimes created 20 years ago when time was very different for all of us, and the exposure to our young men and women was very different in the 1980s than it is in the year 2018. So you create a hiring practice that's very representative of today's applicant, and that means that you're not disqualifying people for low-level offenses or indiscretions in their life, a mistake they made that's going to haunt them for the rest of their life. Within the organization, you have to have an organization that shows upward mobility, that shows the potential to succeed if you're a minority. I'm very proud that Pittsburgh has a command team of 17 people. Of those 17 command leadership members, 7 of them were women, 4 of them were ethnic minorities, 3 of them were members of the LGBTQ community. We were an inclusive leadership team. So when I speak to a recruit, a potential applicant, I can show them that there is a opportunity to not just be a police officer, but to be a leader within this organization, and here's how. And if you're not intentional and purposeful about those commitments and that strategy, then you will have the same abysmal numbers that you have today as it relates to the way the police department's diversity does not reflect the community's diversity.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, we're going to go back to the microphones. I think this gentleman was up first, and you're on deck.
So I have kind of a two-part question. Last week, a study was put out that looked at thousands of police officers' social media activity over police departments across the country. And it was looking for social media activity that would undermine public trust in police. And they found that 1 in every 5 current officers had posted on social media stuff that would undermine public trust in police. Things that display bias, applaud violence, scoff at due process, or use dehumanizing language. Just like one example, a police officer put, "It's a good day to use a chokehold." Another one talked about using a taser on somebody when they didn't want to show a receipt. So I guess my question is 2 parts. I know nationally there's conversations about social media being monitored, police monitoring the social media of activists and communities of color and political groups. And we know that happens in Grand Rapids. We have evidence of that groups like Movimiento, etc. are being monitored by GRPD. So one, are you in favor of monitoring civilians that are not involved in criminal investigations, or what are the policies that you'd like to see around that? And 2, do you think that we should hold police officers to a higher standard if we're already monitoring civilian social media for the things that they post, like the things that I described, in terms of like discipline or, training or otherwise?
Great.
How
Great.
can we hold them accountable
Great.
for that?
Let's start with Chief Payne.
I'll take them in reverse order. You said your second question was should we hold them accountable when it's discovered?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
posts like what I described.
Absolutely.
And how
What
what
should
would
we
that
do?
look like? What would that look like? Like what?
What would that look like? It would depend on their posts, number one, but they're going to be held accountable for it. If they're, I don't be frank, if they're stupid enough to put something like that out there for the community to see, thank you, and then I will hold them accountable, up into firing them. But there is a process that you would have to go through to do that. So if that's their true mindset, and if they've gotten through the vetting process of even being a police officer, and then to continue on in their profession, what they believe is their profession, and they were to put something like that, they need to be held accountable, and we would do that through the process. As far as monitoring groups, yes, we look at intelligence. If it's open source media, we look at it just like anyone else can. We don't do it or pry into private accounts or different things, but we do monitor different social medias that's open source for everyone.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Chief Scarrato.
So, to answer your question as it relates to should our police officers be held to a higher standard, I submit to you absolutely yes, both publicly and privately, in our comments and in our actions, in our words, whether it be in the what you think is the anonymity of social media or otherwise. Being a police officer and being treated like everyone else is not an option. It's a standard that we agree to because we are the only profession in the United States of America that has the capacity and the ability to take life without consultation. Think of that. No other profession in this country has the capacity or ability to do that without input and consultation of others. So if the actions of my officers are jeopardizing and putting at risk the reputation of my organization, then they will be treated fairly and justly and held accountable for that behavior. How does it look? We rely on the community. We rely on the organization that they're going to provide us with input when they see that, and that we're going to take immediate action when we receive it. And that's an assurance from me to you as a community and the administration of this organization.
Chief Yankowski?
Social media has been an interesting topic over the last 5 years. Obviously, we use social media as a department, and we regulate what goes on our web pages now. I will tell you that we try and be as proactive as possible, is that we sit down with our employees the first day that they're hired, and we talk about the use of social media. But at the end of the day, they're going to be held to the core values of the organization. Whether they do something off-duty or on-duty, it could be a violation of our core values, and they would be investigated and disciplined accordingly to our rules and regulations. I will tell you there are times that we have had investigations. Sometimes they've been formal, sometimes it's been informal. I will tell you that when it comes to First Amendment rights, it also applies to police officers that are off duty. However, the knowing and understanding that our police officers are held to a higher standard, period. There's no doubt about it. When we hire a police officer, we're hiring them 24/7, 365. That's the role that they play in a community. And if they say something or do something via social media and it's against our core values and it's disruptive not only to the organization but the community, they will be held accountable for it, period.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you. Sir, state your name and
Speaking
question.
of core values, that was actually something I was going to ask. So what are 3 core values that are important to you as a human being yourself? And what are 3 core values that you would like to see reflected in the police department, knowing that every decision that an officer makes is going to be a reflection of you?
Great. Thank you for that. Let's start with Chief Yankowski.
So integrity is everything that we have. And once we lose that integrity, we can't really represent ourselves, our organization, our community, or our profession. You heard me talk about what I feel are some good traits. I think compassion, empathy, truthfulness, the ability to communicate with others. But the core values for me are integrity, compassion, and the ability to communicate with our public and to be able to de-escalate situations. Those are the core values that I look into a police officer, because that's exactly who I am. I want them to be sincere. I want them to be genuine. I want them to be professional problem solvers, but to do it for all the right reasons. To do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons, no matter what. No matter how hard it might be to make that decision, it's the right decision all day.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
Chief.
And I would just say the integrity part, I think would be true for all 3 of us up here, but I also think they have to be ethical, and you might be splitting hairs, ethical, integrity, I think they all run hand in hand. Officers that are they're empathetic with people in the community and being able to work with them. Those are some of the core values that I look at. Are they building those relationships out there? Integrity, ethical, if they have that empathy, building relationships. That's what I hold near and dear to me, and I would hope that they do also, and they must echo those same things. If we lose any of those things, that's what creates a rift in the trust between the department and the community.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Scorado.
1, 2, 3, compassion, courage, and honesty. Those are the 3 that matter most to me. As it relates to a police officer with GRPD, professional, accountable, and empathetic. And those are my expectations for the officers that work for this organization.
Thank you for your question. Thank you, Chief. Good evening.
Hello. My name is Sherry Williams. I'm a Vice President of Operations with Bethany Christian Services here in Grand Rapids. Remember this face, because whichever of you is chosen, I will be coming to meet with you. It's my understanding that right now, well, first of all, my question is about human trafficking. So being in social services for my 21-year career thus far, specifically in child welfare, I've worked hand in hand with law enforcement many, many years. So thank you for your service. It's my understanding now in the city of Grand Rapids that oftentimes victims of human trafficking are arrested and charged. Is that okay? And if you are selected for this position, what would your stance on that be? And would you be willing to partner with social services organizations to implement a much more victim-centered, trauma-informed approach? And that's why I said, remember this face, because I'll be following up with you.
I
think you're up, Chief Yankowski.
So absolutely, yes. I think that, that you talk about some of the change in law enforcement over the years is exactly that trauma-based approach to our victims. We know, I will tell you, we hired a police social worker that's embedded with the Lansing Police Department now. And one of the things that we're tackling is just this, is that, how can we get those resources and recognize that every time we have an investigation, whether it's a sexual assault case, whether it's some type of prostitution case, we embed a specialized detective. We actually have a FBI agent embedded into our organization, and we always look at the angle of human trafficking. We come across establishments that might be massage parlors, and they're not really massage parlors, right? And so when we do those investigations, we always look at the human trafficking angle first. But at the end of the day, it's about getting that victim that is out of that lifestyle, and we've partnered with some other community stakeholders in our community to get them the resources that they need. And knowing and understanding that there's normally additional variables that go into that. Maybe there's a substance abuse that's attached to it, but really they are a victim, not an accused of a crime.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Payne.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to hear more where victims of human trafficking was charged, and maybe we can talk about that afterward. It's certainly something we can look into. I do know we have had operations where we have investigated human trafficking, and to my knowledge, we tried to get those victims into programs, and as the chief mentioned, sometimes it's substance abuse, sometimes it's just counseling. So I'd like to hear more from you of what more specific things. Obviously, this isn't the forum to discuss that, but whether I'm the chief or not, you've piqued my interest in that. If we're not treating victims of human trafficking accordingly, we need to look into it and try to do a better job with it. But as the chief mentioned, the massage parlors, the exploitation of young kids. I know we have dealt with it with our detective that's embedded in ICAC. It's a MSP program where we specifically look, and there again, social media plays a huge part of this, where we're aware juveniles are being prostituted out through the internet. So through our I'm losing all my, yes, where detectives monitor computers to, you've been a great assist to me, thank you. Where we monitor social media to try and impact that. That's where a lot of it occurs. I'm part of the Freedom Flight. I try to get to those meetings often on immigrants. Sometimes we see it in those communities where people are being victimized in that manner. First of all, I'd like to hear more if we've taken a victim and criminalized and not gotten them services. But it's a real problem, and it's across the country, and it's right here in Grand Rapids, and we need to deal with it.
Thanks, Chief. Chief Scrotto.
So every good chief needs a great deputy. So if this does not work out for me, then I may be able to apply as his deputy chief. But on a serious note, I think we need to be cognizant of our most at-risk population. Our family crisis unit in Pittsburgh focuses on missing children and exploited human trafficking, and building in systems that when you are a repeat runaway and you are in and out of the system, that we start to investigate the why, the purpose behind, and then oftentimes we realize it's not by choice, it's by exploitation. So by the very nature of victim and the very charge for a police department to do no harm, I can't imagine a situation or scenario that we would cause trauma to a victim again out of the sake of arrest or the necessity to make an arrest. So I support exploring every avenue prior to making any type of arrest, and if it is more likely a victim, then treat it as such, and then utilize the social service system to provide resources to aid them and minimize that harm and help them through that trauma.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes,
Thank you for your question. Sir.
How you doing? I'm J.D. Chapman, 3rd Ward resident. This question is for everybody, but specifically Payne. Historically, the union has been extremely strong in this community. A lot of times they go against community leaders and activists that are really trying to bring change to this community when it comes to police-community relations. As long or veteran officers and administrators, how can this community have trust that you will stand up to the union?
Chief Payne.
Yeah. I think specifically here in Grand Rapids, I think is a lack of relationship and understanding what the union's roles are, that is perceived sometimes as their strength. Every employee has rights, and we must follow due process, or their process, just like we do in the criminal court system. And that's the union's role, is to look out for that employee's rights. Now, sometimes they come across, and it may not be popular what they say, but we have to work with them, and it's all about building that relationship with them. I can say I believe I have a good working relationship with, I think we have 4 unions within the police department, not just our sworn. Sometimes, and it came up earlier with the unions, sometimes there's compromise that you must be able to do. What cannot be compromised are the standards of that we've set when someone crosses the line, and they must be disciplined. Again, with people in the community, we sometimes agree to disagree. Since you called me out, I'll say you and I have had a lot of conversations where sometimes we don't agree. That's the same thing with the union. Sometimes we have to agree to disagree, but we must do what's best for the organization as administrators. And I respect the union's role in what they have to do. I think it's perceived sometimes they have more power than what they actually do. We've always, or at least I have always, looked out for the organization and, more importantly, the citizens of Grand Rapids when dealing with the union and decision-making when it comes down to employees and what they've done.
Thank you, Chief. Let's go to Chief Scarato.
So I don't believe for a moment that the union's objective is to impede progress or impair or damage community relations. Yeah, right. And maybe I'm naive to that cause, but I've worked on the labor management team for Pittsburgh for quite some time, and oftentimes the union is very vocal in their opposition to a lot of issues. I think it's important, like any relationship, is that because the union has a role and a responsibility, and that responsibility is to employee rights, and to ensure that their officers are taken care of and treated justly, and their due process is followed in situations. And a big role of the organization is employee compensation. So it's important to define that the role of the chief of police is to dictate the organizational tempo. And that we will not always be aligned. We will not always agree. They will always be welcome to the table, just like the community is always welcome to the table within my administration. They hope, and I hope, that we are able to build consensus on most issues. However, when we can't, it's quite clear that Mr. Washington has tasked me with leading this organization. The community has tasked me with moving forward the relationships and the concerns and their priorities. So, and then I am committed to the professional development and wellness of the officers. So we all have the same goals in mind. We just may go about it differently. And as long as we're clear on our roles and where those roles are defined, I think you can have a productive relationship with the union leadership if we recognize that the end goal for all of us, theirs and mine, is to create and provide a service, a respectable professional service to the communities that we serve and lead, or the communities that we serve and we're involved in.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Yankowski.
So I come from a family of union. My dad worked for Ford Motor Company for almost 40 years and was heavily involved with the UAW. And so, before he passed away, we've had many good conversations about the role of a union steward, if you will, and that there has to be a give and take there. And I would also agree, when I talk about compromise, I'm not talking about the standards of the organization. If I make a decision to discipline an employee, if I got to take that to arbitration and an arbitrator overrules me, I'm going to make the best case that I can. But in the world of arbitration, sometimes it's a 50-50 split. You don't know what you're going to get. And I can give you case after case that a police chief has made the right decision for all the right reasons, and an arbitrator has overturned that. That's not what we're talking about, right? I'm going to hold our employees to the high standards that we have set in place. When we talk about bargaining at the contract table for operational needs, I think that's where those voices, you have to have compromise in there, is that if we have certain things in the organization that need to be changed so we can move forward, then that's where we got to have those conversations. But at the end of the day, you know, the chief of police sets the tone for the organization, and all those employees that are union members represent the organization. And, you know, they do play a role. They're there to protect the employees' due process rights, and that's the role that they play. But I also agree is that, you know, you have to have that strong relationship, and you know, at certain times and certain topics, it could be more contentious, but that's my role, is to work through that for the good of the community, the good of the organization, so that we have a plan that we can push forward for progress.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for your question. Okay, we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to do one question off Facebook Live. And I think I've been given the 7-minute warning.
Okay. I won't be 7 minutes.
Go ahead, sir.
My name is W. Paul Mayhew. And so I've sit here and I've listened and I've listened. So I have heard people say stuff like particular Transolar card, the card that a lot of the Hispanic community use to show identification. Does anybody know what that card looked like? You do. See, one of the things that we don't do is we don't show pictures of what important things in the community is. Now, that particular card is an important card. If you had it up on the wall and everybody could see it, you say, wow, that's what that looks like. So then you convince another person to use it properly because they can see what's happening. That's one. The other thing here is that the community needs to be able to see visible stuff. During the period of time that Chief Haggerty was around, we put together a team that was a nonprofit team within our own community, and went out and made billboards dealing with crime, dealing with community and police interaction. And those billboards helped a lot. A lot of people said, oh, that's what that is. You got community and police interacting and working together. Now, if you see a picture of it, everything that we said here today, I don't see any pictures. Now, there's the American flag over there. It gives you, it connotes a whole lot to see an American flag. Now, we got to be more, we got to be more up to date, because showing pictures of what we're talking about helps us, you know. And so those little pictures and things that we've done back in the day helped a lot in working with Chief Haggerty to work it out. I had my son, I said, son, draw me a picture of what happens when you go to the Civilian Appeals Board. Well, he drew me a little animated character and says, and I said, from the police, from the community to the Civilian Appeals Board. And he had a little character that would, you know, go from this place to that place to that place. So if you gave somebody a picture, and they say, wow, well, that's what happens. Because it's more fun looking at that picture than all them words and all these words and super words that we've came up with today. They're good words, but where's the pictures? How do I understand and how do I know that that's that?
Right.
If you don't show me a picture.
Do you have a question for the gentleman?
No, I don't
No?
have no question.
Okay, all right.
I'm just preaching.
I hear you.
All right. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is the fact that we need to be more picturesque in terms of how we communicate back and forth with each other. We've sat here for an hour or so and talked about a gazillion things. But who has the picture of what we're doing, except for maybe you could take a picture of this and show it and say, this is what was here. But you don't capture any of the conversation and put that in the picture. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Do you guys understand what I'm talking about?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, but let me
Appreciate
finish.
it.
Okay, and I know I'm at the last.
We got time for one more question.
So anyway, that's what I'm talking about. We got to be able to put things in ways that we communicate as human beings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Oh, you don't have to give your name or nothing at this. Do
You don't, sir. You can
Okay.
go ahead and ask your question.
What I wanted to ask, though, more involvement with the youth. Like I deals with drug-related and alcohol-related program, and I've been in it since 1979. At first, those programs used to send those programs that got troubled youth. I'm 72. I forget what I'm saying sometimes while I'm saying.
You're totally fine.
You know, those programs that are involved with youth used to send them to this program. And to give you a good example of the type of progress that was made, this had to have been probably back in 1995. There was a young man that came in there, and they asked him had he finished high school. He said, no, the teacher didn't pass me. She thought she was going to make a fool out of me, so I quit school. And the guy that was chairing the program said, oh, so you beat her to it. You made a fool out of yourself, huh? You know, and now this young man, he's a manager out at Myers, and he stops us sometime and tells us about what they did to tell him that. But they don't send those kids down there no more. And they don't send them anymore because they caught some of them outside smoking weed. Instead of sending a supervisor there with them, they don't send anybody with them anymore. And the reason that I was going to say that they need to initiate something for the youth, because I've been in Grand Rapids since 1972, not 1967. And I have had guns pulled on me a couple of times, and my hands goes up. I follow the instructions, and these youth don't follow the instruction now. They need to get somebody to talk to them, to tell them that you could be shot. They need to have some sort of community relationship program going on with these troubled kids that let them know that whatever they have did, listen to the police and take it out after you go to court. Because when the guy pulled the gun on me, my conversation was over with, you know.
Great.
And then the next thing I wanted to say, somebody brought up something about good cop, bad cop. Okay, if you shoot a guy 3 times, you're trying to disarm him. But if you shoot him between 19 or 20 times, what is the good cop and what is the bad cop? That's what I'd like to know.
Okay.
Do you have 5 minutes to listen to our questions? I said there's only 2 of us left. You have 5 minutes so you can listen to our questions. My name is Ana Aleman Putman, and I was a principal here at Cesar Chavez, and I was a teacher here for many years. And my question, and I have to preface this by saying my brother is a police officer, so thank you for the job that you do. It's an important work. So my question is about the most vulnerable, because I myself am a principal, and I always worry about the children. And it hurts my heart because here in this community, the children are afraid of the police officers. I say to them, you know, they are friends. You don't have to be afraid of them, but that's not how they see the police officers. So my question is, knowing that we want a community that's inclusive and we want the most vulnerable to believe and trust in the police officers, what might be some of the first steps you would take? And I've heard some of your answers to make sure that the children in this community know that they can trust the police officers and count on you when they need you, and that they'll be safe.
Thank you
That's
for
my
that.
question.
Thank you. Let's start with Chief Scarrato.
So oftentimes you hear us speak ad nauseum about community police relations and partnerships, and most oftentimes it's directed to the adults within our communities. And it's as if the children are forgotten entities, and we lose sight of the fact that they will soon be adults. And they will soon be interacting with our law enforcement officers, and they will soon be representing this community and all of our communities. So it is equally important to engage in relationship building early and often. I struggle when, and this is no offense to fire if they're even in the room, but that the firemen are heroes. What happened to police officers being heroes in the eyes of our children, right? And that is a goal. That is a primary purpose of why I do what I do, is that I want our children to look at our officers, the men and women that do noble work, and believe that they are their heroes, and then see them as a noble profession that they aspire to be. And how you do that is giving your youth the same importance that you give the adults in our communities, that our officers are participating in youth camps. There are several of them throughout the city in the summer. We have a program in Pittsburgh that is part of your academy commitment and graduation, is that you will partake in youth movement, in youth groups, and youth engagement, and that it's organic that our officers in their earliest stages will engage with our children in their most formidable years and grow together to become adults in the community and then adults within our organization. And you can't treat them as insignificant or of lesser value because maybe their voice isn't as loud and they're not as tall and they're not as outspoken or engaged and they're not asking for it. That's something that we have to give our children is role models, and then why not it be the police?
Thank you. Chief Payne?
Yeah, I agree. The children are our most valuable commodity that we have. And I do remember you when you were principal here. We've met several times on just coming in, and that's what I think we need to do more. We need to figure out how to get our officers more engaged. I think we have a good relationship specifically with GRPS. We have officers in reading programs throughout the city. We need to get them, I need to find out ways of getting them more involved. So as the chief mentioned, where officers are looked at as heroes. That's part of our Grow Your Own. It starts at the very young and letting them know that we are here and this is a noble profession, that they could potentially someday be a part of this profession. So I echo what you said, and I believe that's where we need to focus some of our resources toward and getting more officers in schools.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Yankowski.
And certainly, we've done a lot of youth interaction in my current agency. But I'll tell you, what's influenced me throughout my career? When I go to certain community events where I'm having interactions with youth, and sometimes the first thing that they do when they come up to me is they point towards my firearm, and they indicate and they start asking questions about that firearm, and I have to always redirect them, to a different part of the conversation. But when it comes to interacting with our youth, their minds are like a sponge, and what they see, what they hear, they absorb, and a lot of times we can turn that into a positive. And certainly at a young age, sometimes at the age of third grade, fourth grade, we can still influence them in a positive way. So, we can't do enough of it. We do hundreds of things a year. We send our police officers in the schools, but it's every time, even like, for example, you can hear fireworks going off, right? And so if a police officer comes up to a kid that might be discharging fireworks, I apologize, I said fireworks, not firearms. Those fireworks, that opportunity that you have an interaction with a kid might be their first interaction with a police officer, and that's going to be impactful for them. So you gotta remember that the first interaction you have with a youth can really make an impact on their whole entire life. I can't tell you the number of times we've had conversations with future police officers that said, I wanted to become a police officer because a police officer didn't treat me correctly, or B, a police officer helped me and my family. And we got to remember that the interactions that we have with adults, the kids are also seeing that as well. So we've been working with the school district in providing, notifications of what we call handle with care, that this child was involved in a traumatic interaction, either with law enforcement or law enforcement was a part of a trauma for that child. So you got to keep doing it.
Thanks, Chief. Okay, so we are over on time, but we have two more speakers. So we're going to take the questions one after the other, and then we're going to do a lightning round with these guys. We want to be respectful of everyone's time.
And I do apologize for taking longer and all that. My name is Allison Lutz. I am a resident of the West Side. And so there's a lot of warranted discussion about racial bias in policing. And given that it'll be a really important issue, rather than just saying, yes, I'm against biased policing, there are a couple issues and policies that have been researched by either civil rights groups or have proven effective in other cities that I'd like to kind of introduce and see what your guys' thoughts are. So one would be removing barriers in the police contract, like requiring investigations into misconduct to occur within a certain amount of time from the misconduct, so that you don't lose the ability to hold people accountable, as well as you guys have mentioned, giving the Citizens Appeal Board some more power, conducting an analysis of individuals and groups that are being surveilled right now to see if they actually need to be, or if it's being done in a discriminatory manner, ending no trespassing letters and photograph and print policies, which the ACLU of Michigan has said contributes to over-policing in Grand Rapids in a racially biased way, implementing policies to start with a verbal warning and de-escalate as much as possible, and along with that, right now, there's only 8 hours of focus paid to de-escalation, while there are 60 hours towards learning how to fire a gun, and I think that's something that needs to be fixed. And I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts on those.
Thank you. And what's your question, sir? You have a question?
Yes, I sure do. First of all, I want to comment about the gentleman that said he looks on social media 1 out of 5 times about the police, what they do. Well, look on social media and see what the good they do. You'll find a lot of great things that our PD do. They're unjustly treated. We need to have more officers in the city. That's just a fact. We're down 100 and some officers. The morale of our PD is the lowest it's ever been, and you probably want to do your due diligence and check with the rank and file, and you'll find that's very true. They do not want to be policemen and women here. And I know there's issues, so I'm not taking away that fact, and we need to address those, but don't they generalize our police. We have 294 sworn officers, that's 100 low, and it's not all the police that make these mistakes. Yeah, good enough. Yeah, well, why don't you look up the positives? Why don't you look up the good things they do? You know?
Excuse me, we're not going to do that tonight. We're not going to do that tonight. So we're going to stop the meeting if we can't have civil discourse.
Right.
So, Mr. Brand, finish your question. Please address your question to the panel.
If you can state a question, appreciate it.
Just the fact that we need a lot more police in Grand Rapids. Their morale is horrible, and we got to bring unity, not divisiveness. And divisiveness occurs by just complaining. Unity means working together. So my questions are, we need more police officers, and we need the morale to be boosted.
That's not a question. Let's address the first question.
So I think as it relates to personnel, we are, as administrators, dealt with the hand we are given and agreed to. We recognize that the organization is at 294, soon to be 297, and my role as an administrator is to how do we best deploy those resources as we see them today, not as we wish they to be in the future. So I have to create initiatives. I have to have input with the city manager and the city leaders in what type of police department do you want. I asked Mr. Washington that some time ago. What type of police department do you want? I'll ask the community the same thing. What type of police department do you want? And then we commit to a strategy of giving the community and the city administration an organization that fulfills those goals. The wish list can go on and on. There will always be things that we wish we have. I live in the reality of what I have today, and my strategic plan will be based on those realities of today, not the wishes of tomorrow.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Payne.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mentioned the study before. We have to look at some of the things that are in that study and determine what type of services we're going to be providing. And I think that's input from the community, from the city leaders on what we are capable of doing, and then with the resources that we have. Chief is right. It's like Christmas. I'm going to continue asking for more officers. If I don't get them, then I have to work with what I have. And the city has to be fiscally responsible. Mr. Washington give us 50 officers this year, and depending on the budget, we may have to lay him off. I went through the rounds of layoff. That is something that was really demoralizing to this department, seeing officers laid off. So the city has to be fiscally responsible as we build up. We've added civilians positions that we desperately needed. So this is not a sprint, it's going to be a marathon to get the resources for the city. I don't know whether we ever need to get back up to the 400 officers that we had. We certainly could use more, but we have to work with what we have and make sure we're utilizing them the best way to serve the community.
Thanks, Chief. Chief Jankowski?
Yeah, and so myself, in my agency, we've had to, utilize the resources that we have in the most effective, most efficient manner. I don't know a police chief in the country that wouldn't want more resources, but to use those resources in the most efficient and effective manner as well. So when we look at the staffing study, when we look at the needs of the organization and whatever policing strategy that's going to be put forth, it's about the unobligated time that our police officers have. Are we utilizing the time that they have available? Is there any movement inside the current organization that we have? With my police officers now, it's always the number one issue. We want more resources, but again, you have to live within your means. You have to be fiscally responsible for the funding that we have, because we have to recognize that the city has other needs, and certainly we can expand on policing resources in a lot of different ways. When we talk about how technology is changing the way that we police as well, the voice of the community, the voice of administration, the voice of the men and women of the organization will help dictate how many more resources or how we use those resources moving forward.
Thanks, Chief. So that's the end of our questions and remarks. I'd like to invite the city manager to come up and say a few words in closing.
Let's give our candidates a big hand. Thank you for your time, your patience, and indulging us, and we appreciate your very thoughtful responses. I also want to thank our consultant, Gary Peterson. Let's give him a big hand as well. I know that we had, right before the last question, multi-part, 7-part question. And if you could email that to my assistant, I will make sure I follow up with these gentlemen on tomorrow. You may also make sure if there were questions you wanted to ask, comments you want to make, please indicate those on the comment form and deposit those with the staff on the way out of the school, and they'll receive those, as well as you can continue to make comments online, and you see the website address online. Thank you so much. I believe the media is we have a media room available for the candidates, and I will more than likely make a decision within the next couple of weeks, finalize public announcements on the decision. Thank you so much.